Hello there, everyone, and welcome to PsychoSocial Healing 0.5. This was a 5-week free workshop each Sunday at 7 p.m. GMT, touching on the topics of our social nature, anxiety, stress, trauma, and self esteem. This is the abridged version of PsychoSocial Healing 1.0, which is now available at www.psychosocialhealing.com. I'm offering a limited time discount for those who join me on this journey. For as long as this course is live, the offer will be available. I want to offer my most sincere thanks for making the investment of time to participate, and in doing so, investing in yourself. Seriously, I want that investment to be worth it. You want that investment to be worth it. So, what is it? The investment of your one true premium. The one investment you can never get back, your time. Investing in your growth enough to do the exercises, come back each week, and being serious enough to change is what will make this course worth that time. And as I said, you're not getting this time back, so it's best to treat this time for its priceless nature and squeeze the absolute most out of me and yourself. None of this will work unless you do. With that in mind, I'm so excited about sharing with you what has been years and years of study, action, growing from adversity, psychotherapy, and inner work distilled down to 5 chapters with exercises at the end for you to internalize the lessons learnt. Today is chapter 5, Self-Esteem, the state of how appropriate to life you feel and how deserving of happiness you judge yourself to be. We will look at the effects of low or unhealthy self-esteem and what is necessary to build a sense of healthy self-esteem. So grab a notepad for the last time, lock in, and let's dive in. A common assumption about self-esteem is that it's merely the feeling of goodness about oneself, as touted by popular culture's idea of empowerment. However, self-esteem goes much deeper than that. In his book, The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, Nathaniel Branden defines self-esteem as confidence in our ability to think, confidence in our ability to cope with the basic challenges of life, and confidence in our right to be successful and happy. End quote. Your self-esteem will dictate a lot more than we imagine. It dictates not just the depth of your lows, but also the ceiling of your highs. And the scary thing is that you will unconsciously bring about the conditions that confirm this perceived level of worthiness, if only to remain consistent with that perception. This means that if you don't believe that you are worthy of something, you will not reach for it, or even worse, you will actively sabotage yourself. You will unconsciously create the conditions where what you want is forever beyond your grasp. You will convince yourself, of whatever reasons you come up with, to not take action. Let's examine the foundations of this house that you have built in your being. The formation of your self-esteem, for better or worse, starts with our early life experience, i.e. events, relationships, and conditions which have implications for what we think about ourselves. Examples of negative experiences would be rejection, neglect, abuse, criticism, punishment, lack of praise, interest, or warmth. Conversely, also excessive praise and pushing a high standard on a child, and feeling left out. These early life experiences form our core beliefs or bottom line. Our core beliefs are an assessment of our worth or value as a person. They are conclusions about ourselves based on experience or this is the kind of person I am. Examples of negative core beliefs would be I am bad, I am worthless, I am stupid. From our core beliefs, we then form underlying assumptions, which are intermediate level beliefs concerning what we should expect, assuming the core belief is true. Often these take the form of an if-then statement. If I do this, then this will happen. For example, if I try, I will fail. If people get to know me, they won't like me. If I say what I think, I will be rejected. Out of both our core beliefs and underlying assumptions, we develop rules for living, which are strategies for coping, assuming the core beliefs and underlying assumptions are all true. Too often, these strategies are maladaptive, meaning that they are a counterproductive way of dealing with the problem. Examples of negative rules for living would be I must get everything right, I must always put others first, I must do everything to the highest possible standard. The very process of CBT psychotherapy is concerned with digging down to these foundations, identifying them, analysing them, disputing them, and then switching them out for healthier foundations. This often requires the heavy machinery of psychotherapy and a mind willing to carry out the refit. So, how do our core beliefs, underlying assumptions, and rules for living play out when they are activated or threatened? I'd like you to take you on a visual journey to describe how this plays out. Imagine the feelings of low self-esteem as a figurative downward spiral, and this diagram is a cross-section of that journey down. You will notice that this journey is designed as a trap in the form of loops, but more on that as we continue. At the top we see a trigger situation. This is the first entry pool, as it were. In a trigger situation, our rules for living are under threat of being broken. Going down the left-hand side first, we see a steep descent down to activation of the core belief. We go down this path if there is no doubt that our rules have been broken, and therefore immediately our core belief is activated. I am bad, I am worthless, I am stupid, etc. Since there was no question your rules are broken and your core belief is activated, this naturally leads to depression. From here, we either take a passive approach to self-sabotage, where we engage in self-critical thinking, hopelessness, and rumination, then right back to depression again in what I call a passive depression loop. The other option the cycle provides from depression is coping strategies. For example, addictions, emotional eating, self-harm. These only lead right back to self-sabotage, then back to depression again, and again in what I like to call an active depression loop. If in the moments of activation we stand there despairing at the broken pieces of our rules, a trapdoor opens under us and we go straight down to what's known as confirmation of the core belief, the very bottom of this cycle. Here we say things like, I knew that was going to happen. I knew the problem was me. I really can't get anything right, etc. To be fair, this place is great if all you want to do is rant and rave. However, the allure of pity doesn't last long, for the self or for others. Eventually, this place loses its novelty, so we desperately try to travel upward toward engaging in self-sabotage, and then now you're stuck in the depression loop. Returning now back to the top, to our trigger situation, we see on the right hand side is a downward spiral. For this route down is the route we take when we are as yet uncertain whether our rules have been broken, but we suspect somehow that they might be. This leads eventually to activation of the core belief, and then down towards negative predictions. Here we can identify our underlying assumptions, for they will be speaking to us. From here, we either take a passive approach or an active one. Passively, we go through anxiety, then right back to negative predictions, forming what I like to call a passive anxiety loop. Actively, we go through anxiety to unhelpful behaviour, for example, avoidance, unnecessary precautions, and discounting successes. This leads, of course, right round to anxiety, and then round and round we go in what I like to call an active anxiety loop. Whether we're taking this loop passively or actively, anxiety compounds, for we are feeling anxious about feeling anxious. As I explained earlier, awareness is key, as it will enable your conscious mind to appraise the situation. Instead of becoming reactive, I want you to become curious about where your mind goes, especially when you've been triggered into negative thoughts. In this instance, be consciously aware that a core belief has been activated, and I want you to just simply call it like it is. Simply say, one of my core beliefs has been activated. Really be curious about something which normally escapes your conscious awareness. The 6 pillars of self-esteem. The experience of a healthy self-esteem is one of competence in the practices of generating it. This is because, similar to the experience of love, self-esteem is as much a verb as it is a feeling. The practices which generate self-esteem are also expressions of self-esteem. According to Nathaniel Branden, in his book of the same name, he describes these pillars as follows: the practice of living consciously, the practice of self-acceptance, the practice of self-responsibility, the practice of self-assertiveness, the practice of living purposefully, and the practice of personal integrity. You will notice that all these pillars are practices, meaning that something requires our active volition and discipline. This is because, to an extent, our consciousness itself, is an emergent property of our volitional decisions. To act or not to act is still a decision. To think or not to think is still a decision. Let's delve a little bit into these pillars. The practice of living consciously. The first pillar is actually one of the most basic survival tools that has enabled humanity to survive for as long as it has. The faculty of being aware of aspects of reality and yourself, and not passively sleepwalking through life. Our mind is one of our evolutionary advantages. It is one of the main functions of the neocortex to consciously perceive and process what we sense as reality and to act accordingly. If we use our mind, we thrive. If we betray our mind, we suffer. And so does our self-esteem. When you're driving, awareness is the key human factor to road safety, is it not? You wouldn't want to just become complacent about where you are in the road in relation to other things, or how fast you're going, whether you're on course. All those things could have dangerous, if not deadly, consequences for yourself and potentially others if you allow yourself to become inattentive. The choice of living consciously is to deliberately choose the effort of thought instead of the path of least resistance, which is not engaging in thought. Why is it then that so many of us spend a considerable amount of time in an unconscious state? Awareness is also a powerful psychotherapeutic tool to escape downward spirals of negative thoughts and emotions. To be aware you are in that entry pool that I spoke about grants the opportunity to make the better choice. Awareness in this situation is not to be delayed, for if you bring conscious awareness to the fact that a core belief is potentially being triggered before your emotions send you down the spiral, you can actually bring yourself out before you hit the bottom. Otherwise, it's your choice to perversely enjoy the downslide into negative narratives. Whee! Negatives wherein you can picture yourself as the indignant victim. This is a tendency carried over from infancy to cry and rely on someone to take your pain or discomfort away. Living consciously requires an active mind over a passive one. A mind that wants to learn and grow, even if that means changing out opinions and assumptions. A mind that can sit in the stillness of the moment without reaction or thought, so it can know where it is and where to go next. Moving on to the next pillar, the practice of self-acceptance. Self-acceptance is the experience of being aware of facts about yourself and with compassion directed inward, being able to say, right now, that is me, or back then that was me, and I work to be better. It requires that we be on our own side, to be one's own best friend. A best friend will call you on your flaws, but they won't judge you for them. So in those moments of engaging self-acceptance, we need to be our own best friend. Otherwise, we would always be in an adversarial relationship with ourselves, never letting go of all the things we aren't accepting about ourselves. We assume our flaws require some reprimand, as is the lived experience of a great deal of people. This is why the core beliefs I listed were some of the most common in our society, because they are the most universal. In these experiences, we were shamed or criticized for mistakes or flaws, and we take that habitual sense of punishment with us, like a torch we take and run with, just so we can routinely burn ourselves with it. So it's just easier to shove that part of us in a closet and slam the door. Or even worse, we can sit at the breakfast table with it every day because you're slowly poisoning it to death. Self-acceptance doesn't require liking or agreeing with something you've done. Rather, acceptance requires that you acknowledge and experience without denial or evasion what is true about you. The opposite of self-acceptance is the disowning of parts of ourselves. This is because the things we need to accept are facts of ourselves and or reality that we need to hear out. These thoughts and feelings that we disown don't go away. Instead, they are sent to an unconscious place that Carl Jung called the shadow. Here they collectively jostle for unconscious control over you. Most of these things are just facts that you need to take on board before you're able to move on. Otherwise, you'll be off down the road again with several sets of hands grabbing at the steering wheel. When we are struggling to accept something, we are being dishonest with ourselves. We're trying to rationalize, this isn't me, or this isn't for me. We lie to ourselves to protect who we think we are. This dishonesty is our resistance, and we resist at our detriment, because resisting doesn't defeat, it merely postpones. If you can't accept something, perhaps you can accept your resistance to accept it. If you can't accept your resistance, then perhaps you can accept your resistance to accept your resistance. Follow this process back until you reach a level at which you can accept, and then go from there. Moving on to the third pillar, the practice of self-responsibility. Responsibility is the active relationship with your lived experience. Granted, as such, it is mostly in the arena of effects rather than causes. A general principle about self-esteem is that you are working towards being at the cause of your lived experience. However, we don't just give to the world gives to us, and it's not all pleasant. So, how can we have an active role in what happens to us? By having an awareness of and a guiding intent behind how you then choose to respond to life. Life has passed a ball to you, and we all got to run. The idea of taking responsibility is often conflated with the idea of blame. This is clear evidence of our difficulty with the idea of responsibility. By conflating the two, we create an emotional excuse to not engage, the assumption being that by taking responsibility, you are accepting fault for what happened to us. This is understandably a repugnant idea that is tantamount to victim blaming. I assure you, responsibility merely means the ability to choose your response. Responsibility. A response comes after the fact as an effect rather than a cause. This means that things happen to us and we respond. Often our automatic reactions to certain stimuli are so fast that we consciously aren't aware of them until we have already reacted, and often then now left with the consequences. This is why the responsibility is so crucial to having a better response to life, to respond and not to react. Blame is to be culpable for a wrongdoing. Say, for instance, a rapist is to blame for the rape, but the victim is now responsible for healing the damage done. So blame is past tense, and responsibility is present to future tense. Blame lies with them, but from now on it's your responsibility to live your life despite it, not because of it. Coming back to the 6 pillars, this practice is in a way the internal support structure for the rest of these practices. We take responsibility to create the habit of taking right action, to blaze the trail in our brain, to take responsibility at the moment that we determine that it's necessary. One of the reasons why we can disown and deny our assets, our talents, our worth, is because we realize that through putting in the effort, we can be of some service to ourselves and others, which involves a sustained effort and the potential creation of expectations in others for you to live up to that responsibility. In a phrase, our assets pose the challenge of responsibility. When we abdicate responsibility for something we can control, we can feel immediate guilt, which can quickly turn into shame. Honor your responsibilities and your self-esteem will benefit. Betray them and your self-esteem will suffer. The scary thing about responsibility is the realization that has to hit home and become a habit of reminding yourself, the idea that no one is going to come along and take care of your responsibilities for you. So often we are waiting for someone to take responsibility for us. We make demands on our society that someone do something, not realizing that someone is us. Here are some mantras that can help build a healthy sense of responsibility. If it's to be, it's down to me. If I don't decide, something else will. And finally, no one is coming. Thank you, Brian Tracy, for that one. Moving on to the fourth pillar, the practice of self-assertiveness. As human beings, we begin experimenting with self-assertion around the age of 2. This is our point of beginning to assert our sense of agency, and tragically, like so many of these pillars, get shamed out of us as children. This can very likely lead to a life of low self-esteem. Self-assertiveness isn't belligerence or rebelliousness. It is not the selfish infringement on the rights of others. Instead, it is the healthy upkeep of your own psychological kingdom. Self-assertiveness is a core responsibility of healthy consciousness. It's about being your own best advocate with understanding and authenticity. It is the part of you that pushes forward into the darkness towards your goals and needs. Low self-esteem increases our over-compliance to the perceived boundaries of others, while eroding our own boundaries to the point of inaction and retreat. We begin to believe that any act of self-assertion would be too much of an intrusion on the will of others. So we rationalize our avoidance as, oh, I'm not going to bother them, or I'm not going to burden them. So it's some kind of respect. We actually surrender ground to others to traverse as they please, completely unaware we never wanted to give up that ground to begin with. And each step they take leaves wounds inside us. You're suffering in silence because your low self-esteem has made you so agreeable that you shrink your space to accommodate others. You accept the treatment of others, even if it's abusive, and you don't see it as your place to question it. A healthy self-esteem requires that self-assertiveness be lived as a rule, to be followed and not shirked, to consider your values and identity as worthy of being expressed, to be in line with your values, to honour your needs and wants, and to find appropriate means of their expression, to prefer an honest confrontation with the facts instead of dishonest compromise. When we act self-assertively, we immediately get a taste for the kind of self-esteem that is experienced by someone who lives self-assertiveness as a rule. Neglect to act self-assertively when we really need to, we damage our self-esteem and deter future attempts to face the responsibility. When you express assertiveness from a place of hurt, that will show as demanding or complaining, which are never good negotiation tools. So being assertive from a positive place, such as the compassion for oneself and for another to understand your needs, you will feel more in a position of power. The very way you ask will change, and then it's more likely that your assertiveness will be respected. Moving on to the fifth pillar, the practice of living purposefully. A purpose is a personal calling, a journey that you are driven to take, often alone. Purpose is crucial for human beings because we don't just think in terms of short-term rewards. We are also existential beings who have a concept and feelings about the past, the present, and the future. We consciously or unconsciously recognize the finiteness of our own existence and want to work towards some kind of long-term goal or outcome that will make the suffering along the way worth it. To be achieving something, to be creating something of value that lives on beyond you, to pursue a productive life. Human beings require some kind of North Star that we are following, because it pulls us forward through life and can be a profound source of meaning. When we live without a purpose, we either subjugate ourselves to someone else's purpose, which often will be at your expense, or we drift aimlessly, relying on the gifts of chance alone. When you leave life to chance, you eat only the few low-hanging fruit. That which is higher quality will be higher up, meaning you must reach or climb for them. For any change or decision to work in your life, you must incorporate it into your sense of purpose and take responsibility for creating goals. If you want it to work, make it your conscious purpose to work. When you do this, you transform one of your shoulds into a must. Otherwise, we feel no obligation to follow through with it, despite feeling its subtle pull on us. And if it causes us stress or anxiety, which chances are it most certainly will, we will avoid or even openly refuse. To get a sense of what your own purpose would be, you need to look into what energizes you, what you are driven to do. The thing that you could talk about for at least 5 minutes unprepared. You may have already built up enough excuses to not pursue it, but deep down, you know what you're passionate about. Deep down, you know what fires you up. And if you think back to your much younger years, chances are you were much less inhibited in getting passionate about those things that spoke to you. When we are on our purpose, we find it easier to deal with setbacks because we are already in motion. Therefore, we are carrying momentum. This momentum feels good. And it's strange that you actually finally feel like doing the thing that you were procrastinating away from. We wait and we tell ourselves we'll do the thing when we feel like it. And as a result, we never do it because we will rarely ever feel like it. The one time that you can be guaranteed to feel like it is when you are already in the flow of doing it. And lastly, the sixth pillar, the practice of personal integrity. To live with integrity means that your behavior is in alignment with your words, thoughts, and perceived identity. When we are congruent with who we believe and say we are, when we are living what we are preaching, this is what it means to be authentic or genuine. In our first chapter on our social nature, I explained how congruence is attractive and influential because it's an honest signal of a lack of inner conflict. And this is extremely helpful in being able to win friends and influence people. Conversely, a lack of congruence is unattractive and uninfluential because the inner conflict is on display through your non-verbal communications. And you may have what's called the uncanny valley effect. Earlier in the course, I mentioned that a hypocrisy accusation seems to be an easy and effective way of invalidating a person who's talking, because we know it can threaten the stability of the self and expose an incongruence to others. To even think that you may not be living what you are preaching is an affront to our self-esteem, for it knocks out this pillar. When we act at our own self-estimate, we affirm ourselves. When we feel reminded of who we are, and we learn to trust ourselves more. When we act against our own self-estimate, we betray ourselves. We lose trust and respect for ourselves, and again, our self-esteem suffers. We sometimes try to escape into rationalizations, saying things like, that wasn't me. We recognize the incongruity, yet feel powerlessness to resolve it. To live with personal integrity is to have all parts of you consolidated into a whole, or at least be conscious of incongruence and working to line them up. To be disintegrated is to have parts of yourself that you are denying, disowning, or outright murdering. So how do we make sure that we are leaning towards personal integrity even if we have done wrong? Firstly, the remedy for a breach of integrity is an act of integrity. We start, as we often do, with a conscious and non-avoidant acceptance of our behaviour to lay the foundations for personal integrity. From there we can become curious as to the why behind the behaviour. Be careful not judge yourself. Be honest and compassionate with yourself. There will be times when we need to acknowledge our shortcomings and own our mistakes to others that may have been affected by our breach of integrity. The next step would be identifying and taking right actions that make amends for the breach. Finally, we would use this situation as further evidence in our commitment to respond better in the future. Story time. Am I still worthy? Before we move on to the last section on exercises, I'd like to finish here by telling you an abridged story about worthiness, integrity, and self-esteem, taken from a modern reimagining of the Norse god of thunder and his magical hammer, Mjolnir. Thor was a powerful and skilled warrior, about to be crowned the king of Asgard, when an incursion by frost giants into the castle prompts Thor to retaliate to what he considered to be an act of war. Odin intervenes and promptly takes Thor back to Asgard, where he is stripped of his title, his hammer, his power, and is exiled to Earth. Mjolnir soon follows after Odin places a worthiness enchantment upon it, rendering it unwieldable to anyone the hammer deems as unworthy. In this instance, courage, integrity, self-sacrifice, responsibility, leadership, etc. Stuck on Earth as a mortal man, Thor realizes he needs to willfully give his own life to protect Earth against Loki's attacks. And it's in that death, in that act of selfless sacrifice, he becomes worthy again, and Mjolnir's return to his hand brings him back to life. A year later, Loki uses an illusion to trap Thor, an illusion which Thor had been tricked by numerous times and Mjolnir would have been able to detect. He is able to escape, but for a short while afterwards, the hammer doesn't respond. He was being taught patience over charging into battle. For a time, Thor and Mjolnir were an effective team. Thor was again at his most confident, behaving under the assumption that it would always be there as an extension of him, which can always be called upon in a pinch. The very fact that it comes to his hand is confirmation of his worthiness, and thus he acts with confidence. It was the ace up his sleeve, and he knew it. So then, we reach the point in the story where the hero is forced to rely on their own sense of worthiness, or rebuild a sense of worthiness instead of relying on something they have. Odin had just passed away, releasing Thor's sister Hela, the goddess of death, from imprisonment. Thor's folly in using Mjolnir as his go-to attack results in him losing it, as she catches it, then crushes it to pieces. The next time he comes up against Hela, he's confident at first. However, in the face of her power, his confidence soon becomes desperation. He loses an eye in the fight, and similar to how Odin had to give his eye for knowledge, Odin appears to him in a vision and explains that the hammer was merely a tool in focusing his power, not the source of it. He had to, in that moment, look inwards for his power and to let it out. Having no other choice to defeat Hela, Thor brings about Ragnarok, a symbolic death and rebirth event in Norse mythology. Thor is crowned King of Asgard, thus marking his transition to the good king archetype, when their ship is intercepted by Thanos, the Mad Titan, who swiftly kills nearly all those on board, leaving Thor unconscious and drifting in space. He's soon rescued and declares an immediate campaign to forge a new hammer, hinging all hopes of success and revenge on this plan and hyper-focused to the exclusion of all else. Going back to the same assumption that grit and a hammer can solve his problems. A hammer made in the same forge by the same blacksmith out of the same metal. The difference here was that he had nothing more to lose. Due to a malfunction in the star forge, Thor had to use his own body to hold the aperture open, taking the full force of a neutron star for long enough to melt the metal. Having forged the weapon Stormbreaker, Thor travels directly to Earth, where he single-handedly turns the tide of the battle, and when Thanos appears, Thor attacks. However, in his hubris and vengeance, Thor doesn't go for the swift kill, giving Thanos the opportunity to win with a snap of his fingers. It's this failure to take the right action that sends Thor down his darkest path yet. After tracking down Thanos and killing him, Thor realizes this execution was too little too late, and over the next 5 years he became an obese, petty alcoholic who isolated himself with a small group of yes-men. A chance for redemption came with a mission through time to bring everyone back. Normally, Thor would be able to stay on point and keep his emotions in check, but the last 5 years had made him soft. When he sees his mother, who would be killed in a few hours' time, he has a panic attack and sneaks off to talk to her one last time. Being the wisest person in Asgard, Frigga is able to give Thor exactly the kind of counsel he needs. Her most impactful advice being, everyone fails at who they're supposed to be, Thor. The measure of a person, of a hero, is how well they succeed at being who they are. Thor has his closure and is about to leave when suddenly he puts out his hand and waits. A few agonizing moments later, Mjolnir's handle lands in his palm. "I'm still worthy," he says triumphantly. Exercises. Number 1, true affirmations. Affirmations, if consistently followed, are a great way to strengthen our sense of self. Sometimes it helps to do these each morning in the mirror. That's the advice you normally get, right? Wrong. This advice is one of the biggest lies ever told in self-development. You want to know why? Just give it a go. Look at yourself in that mirror and tell yourself these cookie-cutter phrases written by someone else who doesn't even know you, and see how they fail to change anything about your resolve or self-belief. This is not how we strengthen our mind or change ourselves for the better. There's a reason why it feels fake to say, "I am strong," or "I am a confident person," because that may be a bald-faced lie at that point in time. The truth may, at that point, be that you are broken, that you are struggling with insecurity, that you are weak, that you are unconfident, that you are scared, that you are overwhelmed. We often shield ourselves from the truth because truth is a judge that destroys the story that we create to avoid the truth. Acceptance requires that we are also okay with the reality of where we are right now. Because if you already truly were these things, you wouldn't be here doing this for one. You would just be living the life of someone who was. So where are you starting from? You won't get anywhere unless you acknowledge where you are now to plot a course forward. So instead, with these affirmations, I want you to get real with yourself, to really start affirming the person that you are in a way that's going to help you. In the words of Alex Hormozy, quote, "You don't become confident by shouting affirmations in the mirror, but instead by having a stack of undeniable proof that you are who you say you are. Outwork your self-doubt." So you know what? I'm not going to give you a list of phrases. I don't know you. You know you. So I want you to dig deep and find all the great achievements and milestones that you have gained, the signposts that undeniably confirm that you are this person, so you can affirm them. And don't just settle for them either. I want you to build upon this stack. The bigger and more impressive the stack, the better. Number 2, challenging underlying assumptions. We begin to challenge our underlying assumptions by using what are known as thought records. For this exercise, you will need to create 5 columns on paper or on device. In the first column, you'll write the heading situation. Here you will detail the who, what, when, and where of a trigger situation. We can redo this exercise for any trigger situation you wish to work through. In the second column, you'll write the heading underlying assumptions. Here, you will explain what was going through your mind at the moment of being triggered. What kind of thoughts or images were you having? You will also circle thoughts that are particularly upsetting. These will be called hot thoughts. In the third column, you'll write the heading evidence that supports the hot thought. In the fourth column, you'll write the heading evidence that refutes the hot thought. In the fifth column, you'll write the heading alternative balanced thoughts. Here you will formulate better, more realistic interpretations of the underlying assumptions, considering the evidence. Number 3, changing the rules. The following is a series of sentence stems which can help get you started in changing your rules. Number 1, my rule is, so you will just state the rule in your own words. Number 2, the effects of having this rule in my life are, so you will summarize the ways in which your rule has affected you. Number 3, I know that the rule is in operation because, so you will note the clues that tell you that your rule is active, meaning thoughts, feelings, body sensations, or patterns of behavior. Number 4, it is understandable that I have this rule because, so you will summarize the experiences which led to the development of the rule and have reinforced it. Number 5, however, the rule is unreasonable because, so you will summarize the ways in which your rule does not fit the way the world works or asks more of you than can reasonably be asked of normal, imperfect human beings. Number 6, the payoffs of obeying the rule are, so you will summarize the advantages of obeying the rules and the risks of letting it go. Number 7, but the disadvantages are, so you will summarize the harmful side effects of obeying the rule. Number 8, a more realistic and helpful rule would be, so you will write out your new rule in your own words. This brings us both to the end of this chapter on self-esteem and to the end of this course. I want to thank you all for having the patience and willingness to do something that's extremely hard for people to do, working on yourselves. If you have enjoyed this short course and are willing to take this further and delve into even more advanced content, then you can still purchase the full course that's over 8 hours of content at the discounted rate for the next 24 hours. Go to www.psychosocialhealing.com and take advantage of the offer before it's gone. Again, thank you so much for joining me on this hard but healing journey. Whatever you've taken from this, please put it to good use. Thank you.